This UCSD TV program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest programs. Also, make sure to check out and subscribe to our YouTube original channel, UCTV Prime, available only on YouTube.
Let me welcome one more time all the women peacemakers. They brought great life and vitality to this institution for the last 10 years, and we hope for many more years in the future. I would say that the woman I'm about to introduce is not only a peacemaker, but she's also a justice maker. And I think that combination is quite extraordinary, and I know many of you work justice and peace at the same time as well. Now, I thought it was going to be a fairly simple matter to introduce Asma Jahangir. She's someone I've admired for many, many years. I've known her sister a little bit as well. And I thought very simple. She's obviously a very courageous, dedicated, determined, principled spokesperson, lawyer, advocate for all sorts of human rights, whether they be women's rights, the rights of children, freedom of worship, the emphasis in parliamentary democracy over military dictatorship. She has fought big battles for many, many years and fought them with extraordinary courage and success. So I thought, okay, I can introduce this sort of outspoken person who challenges the establishment, who never backs down, and who we'd see as someone who maybe is not really part of the central politics in Pakistan. But then I realized there's also another Asma Jahangir who's been widely recognized, including in Pakistan, as an extraordinarily successful lawyer and public figure. So she's managed to do both, which I think is really an enormous compliment and not an easy thing to do. So let me first introduce the outspoken advocate, public defender, and that she certainly is. For over 40 years, no one has doubted where she stood. She has always stood for principle over convenience and politics. She comes from a family which was politically active, a father who also had his brushes with the law and authority from time to time, and as I say, a sister who joined her in a legal practice, the first all-women's legal practice in Pakistan, and is also a very strong human rights defender. She is someone, Asma, who knows what the inside of a jail looks like. She knows what house arrest means. She has been roughed up by the authorities from time to time. She has been threatened, unfortunately more than a few times, and by people who unfortunately have some credibility when they threaten human rights activists. But she has never wavered in terms of her determination. But against all this, let me cite the other record, which is really extraordinary as well in terms of her public positions. She served 2 terms, not one, as chair of the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan. She was the first woman to serve as president of the Supreme Court Bar Association of Pakistan. She has done more than a little on the international scene, including at the UN. For 12 years, she has been a special rapporteur for the United Nations. First from 1998 to 2004 as the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, arbitrary, or summary executions. This was for the UN Commission on Human Rights. That body was reformed, we hope, and became the UN Human Rights Council. And for the Council, she served from 2004 to 2010 as the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief. She has also fought to change particularly odious legislation, particularly the Hudud Ordinance, which made rape victims victimized as well by the system and blamed for what has happened to them. And she led to its successful reform in 2006. She has received more prizes than one could ever list, and I'm sure there are more to come. But among them are the Raymond Magsaysay Award, which some people describe as the Asian Nobel Prize. From UNIFEM, she's won their Millennium Peace Prize. She's won the Freedom of Worship Medal, and in Pakistan, the Hilal-i-Imtiaz Award. And she won in 2010 the UNESCO Bilbao Prize. Now, I know in addition to the posts that she has served in the UN, that several secretaries general have wanted her to serve additional posts. But somehow she doesn't fit the bureaucratic mode, and she tells me that she's not really all that keen on spending all her time in New York headquarters, which I can certainly understand. She's so much of an activist. What I'm very eager to see is what the next chapters of her illustrious life will look like. She has more to tell us, and we have more to learn from her than I think of almost anyone I could think of. So I feel very, very fortunate coming into this job only 7 weeks ago. One of my early tasks is to be able to introduce her to you. She's going to speak tonight about walking together for freedom. So with that, please join me in welcoming Asma Jahangir.
Thank you very much, Dean Edward Luck, for those wonderful words. I thought you were speaking about someone else. And thank you very much, Professor Shirgi. I would also like to pay special thanks to Diana, who's put up with me for the last 2 days. I want to recognize my sisters here, the peace builders, and all the delegates that are here for peace and justice. I think when we talk about breaking barriers, we are talking about breaking barriers and moving on to a world that has true freedom. And that is why we thought that the topic that I was given, Walking Together for Freedom, was very appropriate. It is also appropriate to invite somebody like me, because I come from a country which is at war with itself. It has internal tensions, and it has external hostilities, which perpetually threaten the country, and in turn, those that are masters of our country threaten the public with the possibilities of the external hostilities, and make that into an excuse of usurping our rights. So on the one hand, they are fighting for our security. On the other hand, they are taking away our very security and our very dignity. One would ask, what is there to be done in Pakistan? And I know several of my colleagues have said to me, well, let's give up. It's just too complicated and too complex for us. And I recall many years ago, when first time I went to prison and I came out, my daughter, who was very young at that time, was very upset that I had gone to jail and said to me, why do you do this? Why do you continuously keep going to police stations and jails? I can assure you that if you didn't do it, women's rights would come. They will come without you. With you there, they may come only an hour earlier. So why do you have to leave us? But I think we are all fighting for that hour earlier. And I believe that we cannot give up. And I also know that simply lack of violence is not peace, or the presence of violence itself does not mean that we are at war. We have no option but to address this global phenomena of hostilities and violence and polarization, to rejuvenate the peace movements, and I agree that peace and justice must go hand in hand. We have to accelerate it. We have to widen the peace movement in all directions. And when I say that peace and justice must go hand in hand, because we heard several times in Pakistan that the Taliban were there, at least the people of Afghanistan have peace. And I do recall one of the politicians coming to the television station and saying over TV, yes, it is of peace, but it is the peace of the graveyard. And we do not want the peace of the graveyard. There were all signs, the warning signs were there, that it is going to erupt. That horrible, silent peace was going to erupt. It was going to make the world a noisier, a more disruptive world. But what happened to the leaders of the world? Why were preventive measures not taken? And these are the questions that we as peacemakers have to put to the leadership of the world. These are the questions that we have to shake them up with. No longer will old sanctions and the regime of sanctions work. It has to be smart sanctions, where people do not suffer, but those that violate peace must suffer. I know that there are many tools in the hands of governments. There are many initiatives that they can take, even softer ones, against those who are perpetrators against peace. But those so far have not been taken. It is also important for us to understand that we are living in an interconnected world. If the US is not at peace, I will not be at peace in Pakistan. If the US is following an agenda for security, that agenda will be followed by other countries as well. And if there is no peace in Rwanda, there will be no peace in Africa. And if there is no peace in Africa, there will be no peace in Asia. So none of us can be complacent in thinking that we are living in our immediate environment of peace. I just want to take you to some of the initiatives that we took, women from India and Pakistan, particularly because women peacemakers are here. We've always thought that negotiating tables, wars, and peace are for men, and it is men's domain. But I begin to feel more and more that women have a significant role to play in peace building. I recall that when India detonated its atom bomb, we followed suit, and all borders were closed, telephone lines were cut, but people through the internet communicated with each other and condemned the detonation of the atom bomb. And that was one of the first times that at least young peacemakers got together from India and Pakistan. You know that we have been to war several times, but during the last war, which was a Kargil war, a useless, senseless war, where the military then stepped in, removed the civilian elected leader, there was such hostility between India and Pakistan. People have stopped going, trains had stopped running between the two countries, even flights were not operating between two countries. And it was at that time that women decided that they must break that silence, that horrible Cold War, which was eating up our societies. And for that, I have brought a small little clip for you to see how women from both sides of the border and peacemakers, not just women. It was then even men came on board and were there to help us, even initially. How in very difficult circumstances we have, sort of extended our hands to each other and given a message so that policymakers begin to understand that people-to-people dialogue and people-to-people meeting and people-to-people understanding has gone so far, has developed to a depth where they will not sit quiet if one army is fighting against the people of the other country. So I would just want you to show you that clip because it was made by my office, who insisted that I must play it for you.
दिखाई देते हैं दूर तक अब भी साए कोई मगर बुलाने से वक्त लौटे ना आए कोई.
Freedom must be enjoyed universally, and there can be no freedom without peace, internal or external. Pakistan is a prime example where winds of freedom are hostage to forces of hatred and hostility. India and Pakistan have lived as two warring neighbors. This has affected the flourishing of freedom in both countries. India's democracy and secularism has been consistently undermined by religious right-wing, who justify anti-Muslim sentiments on the plea that they remain emotionally loyal to Pakistan. Pakistan remained a security state on the plea of hostilities at the border. Peace builders of Pakistan and India, including women, led the movement for a people-to-people contact. This forced the hand of both governments to hold negotiations. These often are abruptly discontinued after some violent incident. Pakistan and India had gone to war 3 times before they conflicted over Kargil, and the peace movement took a severe setback. It was the women of both countries who broke the cycle of disengagement. A bus full of Indian women peace activists visited Pakistan amidst a hostile climate at home. In return, 2 buses of Pakistani women peace activists visited India to call for dialogue. It renewed interaction, and the medium of culture was used as an instrument of bonding. Of both countries, that the people of India and Pakistan welcome the initiatives for the promotion of peace. The doves outnumber the hawks. There is also a realization that human rights can alone thrive alongside peace. Democracy cannot deepen in an atmosphere of war and conflict. Issues cannot be resolved through silence and disengagement. Well, this was just made by friends who realized that I was coming here and felt that I often just take off with my notes. And so to make the lecture a bit more palatable, I need to have some distraction as well. But what they missed showing here, which I regret very much, is the singing, is the way that women both sides sang to each other. And one of the most popular songs was, "Look, sisters are coming, having broken all their bonds. तोड़ तोड़ के बंधनों को देखो बहनें आई हैं, आई हैं, आई हैं, नया ज़माना लाई हैं." That they will bring in a new change, and they will bring in peace. And then we have same kind of jokes. And you saw at one point that there is a theater group that is performing at the border. There was a time when we were beaten up when we went at the border. On the 14th of August is our Independence Day. 15th of August is India's Independence Day. So we used to take candles and meet there facing each other. And we were beaten up badly. But next year we went again, and this time we took a play with us that was critical of militarization, that was critical of war, and this theater group performed while the army looked on, absolutely horrified at what we were doing, and we had to keep telling them it's just going to end, and it ended 20 minutes later. So I believe that peace activists and, in fact, human rights activists have to continuously push the envelope. Nobody is going to give us opportunities just on a platter. We have very recently also witnessed tensions between countries in the West, or societies, some societies in the West, and particularly what happened in my country and what happened in Libya. And I believe that it is important to talk about it because it has polarized society. We have seen that the role of non-state actors has increased, and they can, in fact, play either a very positive or a very destructive role in putting societies together, in bringing them closer, or bringing them apart. The video that was displayed on YouTube, which I have not seen, but reportedly was derogatory to the Holy Prophet Muhammad, and exhibited with the purpose of wounding the sentiments of the Muslims. The outrage in some instances was violent and, I believe, counterproductive. This has brought the debate in public sphere, but this debate has been going on against such vicious acts, how to avoid them in the future, and it has been going on for a decade in the United Nations. And those were the difficult times when I was UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion. On the one hand, there was the OIC, who insisted that every country should have a law on defamation of religion, and that defamation of religion should be accepted as a human rights right. Now, my position on that was very clear. I think religions don't have rights. It is people who have rights. And I also believe that when you make defamation of religion into a human rights, you actually dent the whole framework, the human rights framework. You asphyxiate debate and research, and yet you continuously see that domestic legislation does exist, not as defamation of religion, but forms of anti-conversion laws or blasphemy laws. They do exist in my country, but they also exist in many mature democracies. And once you make a law in the name of religion, it takes decades and generations to get rid of that law. Witness, for example, the law in UK on blasphemy. It took many decades to undo that law, despite the fact that nobody ever used it. But it was considered almost blasphemy to undo that law. Now, and the second thing is that we realize that people always mixed up religion and ethnicity. For example, in the laws that I studied, Sikhism was considered to be an ethnic and a racist legislation rather than a religious one. So after a lot of arguments, I put forward in my report that the test of racism, how it is different to religion, is that you can't change your color and your race or your ethnicity, but you can change your religion. And it's a very simple test. But it was very difficult for people in the West to distinguish the distinction between religious rights and racist rights. One is a spiritual kind of adherence, which you can criticize if you wish to. And the other is a physical one, which if you criticize, you're actually criticizing somebody's physique. So I think that criticism of religion can be done. But we also came to the conclusion, because in the UN, when this debate was going on, they had a few experts, I was one of them, to sit together and to give recommendations. And there were 2 recommendations that we made. The first one, 3 in fact. The first one was that we believe very much that defamation of religion cannot become a human rights law. The second one, what we said was that incitement to violence in the name of religion is a law that is necessary in many societies. Naturally, the threshold of what is incitement will depend from one society to the other, but we recommended that the threshold should be higher rather than lower. And thirdly, a margin of appreciation should be given in each society. And thirdly, what we said was that none of these laws that are there should be discriminatory. For example, in Pakistan, only Islam is protected while other religions are not protected. So I believe that the protection has to be of people. We have to be able to come to some ground, some common ground on these issues. Not because people are creating violence there, but some people may be genuinely wounded there. I think that, in fact, the violence that occurred only proved the point of the people who made the film. And the filmmakers only helped to give religious right-wing extremists in our countries a cause which was missing for them for many years. And both ways, they empowered the right wing rather than the liberals who should have been right up front at that particular point saying both are wrong and nothing justifies violence. And you see now, at least I watched television yesterday, you saw in the General Assembly this debate now from the Human Rights Council has gone up to the General Assembly. And I hope that it will play itself out in a more sensible way so that we do not dent the whole human rights regime just because some people believe that they can go to loot and plunder because some obnoxious character feels that they can hurt the feelings of Muslims by a very vicious recording or a video that they have put up. And there have been arguments that have been made, for example, that freedom of speech is absolute. But I want to remind some of my friends who believe in that. I believe in freedom of speech. I believe in freedom of expression. But I also am aware of the fact that when the genocide took place in Rwanda, it was expression on radio that actually triggered off the genocide in Rwanda. And therefore, when these discussions took place, we felt that that kind of incitement to violence is something that cannot be considered freedom of expression and has to be stopped through legislation. And why I am speaking about this is because I believe that when we are all for the same cause and we are all struggling to build peace, we must all do it with the same kind of mindset. There has to be a meeting of minds amongst peace builders. If I am building peace with a different mindset and you're building it with a different mindset, then the totality of what we are doing, and the effectiveness will somehow be lost in breaking those barriers. I also heard yesterday and day before a number of my younger colleagues say, what is it that I can do? I want to do something, but what can I do? Is it going to be of any consequence or any significance or not? But let me say from my experience that I find that in a movement where you are asking for justice, where you're asking for rights, where you're building up peace, you need the frontliners, you need the communicators, you need the grassroots workers, you need civil society policymakers, you need creative thinking, you need people who connect each other, you need people who form networks, you need people whose voice is heard, and you need to pool all these resources. And unless that is not done, no single individual, no single group, no single mind, no single pair of hands can bring peace or justice in this world. We have to strategize, and we have to recognize the fact that each one of us do harbor prejudices. I would be the first to say that I had a number of prejudices. You have to fight those prejudices within yourselves. And I recall that I had to go to South Africa, and I'm ashamed to tell you this here. It's not in my paper, it just came to my mind. I went to South Africa when their first election was held as an election observer. And I was in a homeland, and we were stuck there for 2 weeks on end. And it was a hotel where you got the same menu to eat morning, day, and night. And so one day I thought that, well, I am not going to sit here in this lobby all day. Let me go. There was a machine, there was a little club next door where people played this machine, put some money in and played some machine. So I said, maybe I'll go there and talk to a few people. And I was sitting on my stool, and a man came and sat next to me on a stool. And just unconsciously, I took my bag and put it on my lap. And this man says to me, I may be black, but I don't have an eye on your bag, ma'am. And I realized, what have I done? I didn't mean to, but I have done something involuntary because subconsciously I have a prejudice. And that is when I really began to say, security or no security, I must go out, I must be seen talking to people, and this is not something, you have to get these prejudices out of your system. And we call it mindset. And this is what we have to address. Because mindsets are obviously formed. Who forms these mindsets? Where do they come from? How is it that my mindset is very different to my neighbor's mindset? We live in the same country, we live in the same city, we live in the same vicinity, we see the same television, we've had the same education. But mindset is formed through experiences, through talking to people, and through education, which may not necessarily be a school education, but it has to be a public education. How is it that mindsets of nations begin to be formed differently? And this is the greatest challenge for an activist who is fighting for justice. What, for example, is justice? Is justice what is written in our law books? For example, in my country, we had an argument just a few days ago because in our constitution, a parliamentarian has to be a person who has to be absolutely truthful, and if the person is a Muslim, must say all their 5 prayers, must fast, must be sagacious. The word used is sagacious. Amin means really honest. And I thought if you apply all those standards to every member of the parliament, there would be no parliament. But lo and behold, while these articles have been there, our judges decided to disqualify one parliamentarian. I'm sure he needed to be disqualified, but to use that very article. So I had to argue that the highest integrity of any institution must be the judiciary, because they're not elected, they're appointed. And one of the criteria of their appointment is their high integrity. Now, if they cannot go through the test of Article 62 and 63, because I'm sure if you applied it to the judges, there would be no benches. And our judges have taken oaths under military governments, they have taken oaths under the Constitution, they have given military governments powers to amend the Constitution. So, but the counter-argument was, but they have done justice according to the book. And I said, yes, that is correct. But according to the laws in Pakistan, you can also punish people to stoning to death. According to the laws of our country, you can also amputate hands, and you can also whip people. But that has fortunately not happened. Why? Because we know that there would be an outrage in society. But again, because these laws are made in the name of religion, nobody can remove them. And in my view, if they actually applied amputation of hands for embezzlement of money, half the upper class of Pakistan would lose their hands. But therefore, what is justice is something that we must recognize. Justice is not what laws are about. Justice is where people must live with dignity. Justice is where everybody must have equal rights. Justice is where you recognize that people cannot be tortured, and all the values of human rights, if they are not ingrained in justice, which is written in our books, then that, in my view, is not justice. For example, the Hudud ordinances that we fought against for many years, that is the ordinance which has amputation of hands and stoning to death. And the evidence for that is the evidence of 4 adult male Muslims, while the victim can be anybody. And particularly in the case of rape, if there are 4 adult, truthful Muslims standing around and a rape is taking place, I don't see how it can happen. So it's irrational. And not only that, it discriminates against Muslims and non-Muslims, women and men, and to my mind, that is not justice. We also feel very strongly that when we are talking about justice, we have to talk about international justice, justice for all, not for justice for those societies that have developed economically and developed politically. And that is why I come back to my first point, that when one of the arguments we heard in Pakistan after the debacle on the film was that there was an argument that I was hearing over one of the television stations of the West. One of your right-wingers was saying, well, this is what we said. Muslims cannot have democracy. You have Arab Spring and see what happens there. But let me explain to you that precisely because you and your governments have supported our dictators for so long, that there has been no political movements in our countries. The only political activity that was allowed, that could not be taken away, continued in the mosques. So the only organized society, civil society, was that of the clergy and their followers. And how do you expect for 22 years dictators who sit there guarding the interests of the US, not allowing political parties to flourish, not allowing civil societies to organize themselves, and when civil societies even do go there, like in Egypt, to shake it up, it will be the more organized section of society that will take the lead. And so there will be a cycle where you will have more religious parties coming into office. Fortunately, that is not the case in Pakistan because we are not Arabs. We have had a movement which was against first the British and then for our own country, and no dictator has stayed more than 10 years. The other side of Pakistan, nobody has seen. We have a vibrant civil society. Political parties have been there despite the fact that political leadership has been hung, assassinated, thrown out of the country. But there have consistently been movements for democracy. There have been labor movements, movements for the freedom of press and media, movement for the rule of law. And that is why in Pakistan, whenever there is a rule by the ballot, the right-wingers resist it because they know that they will never come in through the ballot. They will always come in through the bullet. And that is the reason why this country where I come from is different, and there is always a fear that we may go back to not democracy, but to an anarchy, and then we will have another dictator coming in and saying that the country has gone into anarchy, and therefore I am the only savior for these 130 million people, and please acknowledge me and be grateful to me because I am here to lead you into peace. But that is not the kind of peace we want, because it gives us no justice. I want to then take you to the other side of how peace, not only for only one section of society. If peace and justice has to be the hallmark of progress in society, women must not only fight for it, but be recipients of it as well. In Pakistan, women's rights was not a word that was known till 1980s. And as I said to one of my friends yesterday, that there were all these little women's organizations who believed that if you gave every woman a sewing machine, you would empower her. Now that concept has come to an end in Pakistan. And it came to an end when the more emancipated world was backing up General Ziaul Haq because they needed him for his war in Afghanistan. And because he wanted support inside Pakistan, he was kowtowing to his right-wing constituency. And there were laws upon laws that were being made which were anti-women. And this is when women came out in the streets and not only challenged the spurious Islamization of Ziaul Haq, but also dictatorialship and dictatorship. They were stunned that these women had actually dared to come out. We were badly beaten. Since I was short, I was not so beaten as my tall colleagues, and we were hauled up, taken to the police station. But it was the anger inside the women. We were much, much younger at that time. And the resolve. These were women who had never, ever seen a police station from outside, leave alone from inside. But they were there, and when they were told to leave, they said, "We will not leave. We will not leave until we do not hear an apology from the government over the radio. Give us a radio set." And there was no place to keep so many women in the police station. But we decided that we will stay there, and that is what is networking. We had the lawyers in the city bring us food. They were standing outside the gates. They were raising slogans. We were responding to those slogans. More and more people started to collect outside. It was amazing for that city to have so many women being so happy inside a police station. And finally, at 10 o'clock, the apology came over the radio. And so we went home, only to encounter the next day that the mullah had said, and mullah is our clergy, had said that all the women who were out there in the streets, their marriages have been now dissolved. So one of the mullah came to my father-in-law and said, "You know, your son's marriage, we have dissolved it. we have given a fatwa. And my poor father-in-law was a businessman, really scared of what would happen. So he said, I'll meet you at her father's house. And my father was quite complacent, said, let him come. So when the mullah came and said, you know, Mr. So-and-so, we have given a fatwa. Your marriage of your daughter has been dissolved. So my father said, I think my son-in-law has bribed you. And the mullah didn't know where to look. And he said, Mr. Mullah, what have I done and my friend Mr. Ahmed done? We can give you the same bribe. Please get rid of our wives as well. So the mullah really couldn't go very far. And this continued for many years. We were later on picked up, we were house arrested, we were followed. And what were we being followed for? Because we were meeting our female friends. I mean, they were following us because we were meeting women activists. And as I said this morning, one of the women who actually used to run a cooking class gave a little ad saying that she was holding cake demonstration on Sunday, was picked up and taken to the police station and asked what kind of demonstration it was. I mean, that is the kind of fear that the men who bear arms do have about women, because they don't know what we are. They don't know where we come from. They don't know in what kind of, mold they have to put us in. And then, because we were meeting and we were plotting and planning, we were picked up one day. I was picked up just by driving in the street, made a military under-trial, taken to prison, threatened that I'll never be released, court-martialed, my children will never see my face. But I must say that there were 15 of us in that prison. There was never a dull moment in the prison. We made life miserable for people for the superintendent. And finally, because we were so many of us, and we had created such a mess there, that they released us. And the superintendent jail, whom I now meet very regularly, who was superintendent jail at that time, said to me that I used to get regular headaches every day. And they were all ages. My age, an older woman, a much older woman, and a woman about, at that time, at the age that I am now, 60, was there with us. And she would pretend to have a heart attack in the middle of the night. And then call the superintendent and say, all I want is a bottle of Coke. And maybe it's gas, she would say. So get me a bottle of Coke. But every day, every midnight, she would get the whole staff up. In any event, I do believe that when we as women are fighting for our rights, we must command respect, not to be patronized, because we have been patronized enough. We want genuine respect, we want genuine dignity that we deserve. I think that when we are talking about justice, we also talk about justice to minorities, not just religious minorities, but ethnic minorities, people, gender, people who are lesbians and gays. They must have their rights too. And this is somewhere where the buck stops. When I was Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killings, I was talking about many of the gays who got extrajudicially shot and killed by police in Brazil, and that they were given impunity, the police, on killing them. But there was an uproar in the third committee in the GA, because I was told by many of the countries, including my own, what rights are you talking about? There are no gays in Pakistan. So I said, well, if there are no gays in Pakistan, then it shouldn't affect you. But at least half the countries were absolutely convinced that there are no gays in their country. So I think we also need to tell our governments that people no longer are simple. People have information and far more knowledge than governments have. and that they have to recognize the fact that the world is not simplistic, and that we must give people, regardless of where they come from, their rights. I had a problem, for example, in our country, we had a system of separate electorates, like Muslim votes for Muslim, Christian votes for Christians, Parsis votes for Parsis, and the result was a complete division. So nobody cared about what the non-Muslim was saying. And it took us many years to contest and to fight and to make people realize that this was an unfair system. First, we had to actually convince the non-Muslims themselves that this was unfair to them, because there were obviously a few grandstanders who felt that, well, they'll win elections every time. So why was this election being taken away from them? But the rest of the non-Muslim population suffered. And then eventually, now it is almost abolished. I also had a problem looking at anti-conversion laws when I was Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, on freedom of religion. Because everybody says that they can convert to my religion, but if they convert to the other religion, then they have committed a crime. And this logic, you could not get to them because you said, well, you say that they can convert to yours, but you can't convert out. They say, yeah, but that's our belief, but that's not their belief. And I have to say that I then realized that there are certain religions that do not go out for conversion. And for them it is very painful when aggressive conversion is done amongst members of their co-religionists. For example, Parsis and Buddhists do not believe in proselytization, whereas Muslims and Christians do. So where are we going to create that balance? Surely it cannot be done by law, it has to be done by better understanding. I am going to end very briefly now, but I want to make 2 or 3 points on activism. The first point I want to make is that when you're an activist, and I have learned a lot from my senior colleagues, that you have to be more strategic. You have to plan, and you have to build support. It is not what you are trying to do advocacy for. In terms of thematic advocacy, that has to be continuous. But when you take a particular case, you must be sure that that case is a genuine case, that that case is a case that stands above the other cases. And your timing is also something of consequence. I say this because on the field we have a problem. Sometimes non-governmental NGOs, non-governmental organizations, international ones, or international institutions, pick up a particular case and take it out of context and blow it out of all proportion, which becomes a problem for us when we are on the field because we know they have got the facts wrong. And I can give you some hilarious examples of it, of institutes in the West that you really do respect, but they have made some colossal mistakes of picking up cases which are blatantly fraudulent. And we have had to sit there, defend them, knowing fully well that the person has made this huge mistake. So it is important to verify. Secondly, I think that non-governmental organizations have certain lessons to learn. And this is something that we are learning ourselves. We are all on the learning curve. Many of us begin to feel that we are a replacement for political parties. We believe that politics is a dirty word, that politics itself is dirty. But unless you don't have a political mind, you can never be a good human rights advocate. You must be politically aware of what is happening. And then you have to build linkages. If you are doing capital punishment, then capital punishment, abolition of capital punishment is also linked with rule of law. and rule of law is also linked with lobby with parliamentarians. You cannot all do it by yourself. Plus, I have noticed in my country, I cannot say about other countries, if a particular issue has cropped up and it has gained some kind of attention for the time being, everybody gets onto that issue and dumps whatever they are doing. So there have been times where I have had to, like other people, address the same topic 5 times in the same month. And then 2 years later, that topic is gone. So consistency is something that we must retain. And we have to understand that we cannot do it all. We have to do it in partnership with each other. We must learn to use the mainstream media more effectively, because I notice that the right wing, those people and those lobbies that do not believe in a democratic culture, those lobbies that do not believe in peaceful coexistence, use the media very effectively. We must have superior knowledge of what we are doing than the other person. Because if we are doing something which we say we are experts on, we must be able to have the facts on our fingertips. And credibility is an issue with many of the NGOs around the world. We must make ourselves so credible that the constituency takes ownership of what we are doing. If people begin to say, the Human Rights Commission said it and we believe them, that means that you have credibility, not because you say that what I have said is correct. And we have to have respect for the target group, respect their privacy, their confidentiality. And this I say because I have noticed that we run a shelter home as well for women. And we have enormous demands on us, asking whether they can interview these women. And there have been times when women have been interviewed without their knowing, and their clips have been used, which I think is not fair on them. But finally, I would like to say that I am certain that if we all walk together to gain freedom, I am certain we can. It will not be an hour earlier. It will be many decades earlier. Thank you.